go. Hey, y'all, Pastor Emil here with another episode of Sweet Jesus. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Ice cream is sweet, but Jesus is far sweeter. No ice cream. It's too early for ice cream, and I haven't been to the gym in a while, so no ice cream for me. Brock has spiced pumpkin pecan pie coffee and a cup that's big enough for both of us, so maybe it's empty now.
And it's gone.
You need another cup?
It was. I'll survive.
Okay. But that's going to have to suffice for now for our sweetness aside from Jesus. But Jesus is far sweeter indeed, more sweet than spiced pumpkin pecan pie. Was it good?
It was good. Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
good?
Yeah.
Okay. Not as sweet as Jesus, though.
No, not at all.
No.
And Jesus is decaf.
The topic for the day, the fourth commandment, authority, honor, respect, believe it or not, contrary to popular opinion, at least in America, that's pretty sweet, actually,
Sure.
according to God.
Sure.
It's a good thing. But, again, not so much in America. We like to, this is one of our favorite ones to throw in the toilet, I think.
It is, or to haul out only at the most convenient moments.
Yeah. Our church body in particular, not to throw us under the bus necessarily, but we in particular are really good at only using this when it's convenient.
Yes. Yeah. And very unique ways.
Yeah. So now, if you've been following along, you know that the way that we are going through these commandments, the numbers may be different from what most of American Christians how they number them. Fourth commandment for us is honor your father and your mother. And, I think most people know that. For many others, you may think of that as the fifth commandment. We think of it as the fourth commandment. Again, that's basically just how you number the last two and the first one or two.
Right.
But in our small catechism, the way that Lutherans for the last 500 years have taken this, it's not just about mom and dad.
Right.
This is about authority in general. And that's why we say this is not a very popular idea in modern America.
Yeah, and I think a couple of noteworthy things there. First of all, you're talking about how we structure the commandments. And, there's the numbering, and then there's also the language that we use to reflect what we call the Ten Commandments. This one does not include part of the original language. If we go to Exodus chapter 20, verse 12, here we have, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you.
Yeah.
So there's, and we can look at that a couple of ways. There's an additional stipulation, but it's also a promise attached to this thing.
Yeah, in fact, Paul in Ephesians 6 says it's the only one with a promise.
That's exactly right, and so I think that's worth exploring. And, and as you pointed out there, we do, as Lutherans, we tend to, I don't know about you, how you've taught this thing in the past, but when I do, I tend to immediately jump to all other authorities, so mother, father, grandparents, your teachers, usually I'm talking to teenagers, which is actually, I find this is a commandment that this is one of the easiest ones for teens or kids to grasp compared to adults. Because a kid, your average, 8th, 9th grader, whatever, they live under authority. They go to school. They've got their teachers, administrators, their coaches, their pastor, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, the lady next door who yells at them for,
making a mess of their yard
exactly.
or something.
It is expected for kids to live under authority. So they actually grasp this commandment in a way most adults don't. And so I think there's a lot of value in that. But one of the things that I've tried to do more recently is kind of start with the language of the commandment. Mother and father. Why are these people that are singled out in this commandment that are worthy of honor and respect? You know.
Well, I mean, it's the basis for all of society.
Right.
I think that's kind of how we look at it. It's you need this. Without this, kids don't make it.
Yeah, it's the foundational relationship in every human life.
It's not just about provision, but it's also about learning how life is supposed to work.
Sure. It was the first relationship. If we go to the beginning of Scripture in the first person, Adam, what was the nature of his relationship with the Lord? It was a very father and child relationship. You have creator there. You have teacher and guide, the person who sets boundaries and parameters, and the person who provides. So it is the foundation of the first relationship, and it's the foundation of all relationships.
Yeah. Well, and the very fact that you talk about God and Adam, God's God, and Adam's not, right? And so you immediately have this distinction that you don't get to do anything and everything.
Yeah.
Someone else actually dictates what is acceptable and unacceptable. And of course, we have the one tree you're not allowed to take fruit from. Don't touch it or else you'll die. They do. And then there are all these consequences. You talk about living long in the land. They didn't live long in Eden.
No, they did
we
not.
don't maybe know how long exactly, but
certainly not as long as intended.
Yeah, exactly. And so you see there are consequences for rejecting authority, for disobeying authority, and that doesn't even mean you have to understand.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're just supposed to do it because they are the ones who understand.
Right.
And you have to trust them. Now, military is probably a lot like that. There's, hey, Colonel said, and we're going to do it. And if we don't, we might wind up dead. But we don't know that.
Yeah, but rank establishes boundaries. And so we can translate that and say role establishes boundaries. And so we exist within the parameters of being limited to certain roles in our relationships.
Well, and one of the things too, I think this was something we talked about when we were looking at those Tim Keller videos. There's something freeing about embracing your role and the limitations within it, because now you don't have to. I think this was the identity question, the topic on identity. You don't have to figure it out. Like you don't have to choose from these millions and millions and millions of options. Billions of options. We had somebody in here. She's a member of our church. She does, these products that you can get your what do they call it? Logo or something on.
Oh yeah.
Like T-shirts,
imprinting and things like that.
Yeah. So T-shirts and polos and sweatshirts and travel mugs and all this stuff. And she wants to open a spirit store for Open Arms so that we can make a few extra bucks and also get people wearing our stuff and being excited about being a part of Open Arms. She handed us, a catalog with like thousands and thousands of possibilities. And Lisa and I, our administrator, were looking at this. We sat down with her yesterday. We were looking at this, talking about what should be in there. And we're both like, I think you probably know better than we do. So why don't you just pick? We gave some guideline. I mean, we didn't want to just completely punt or act like we didn't care. It was just when you have too many options, it just becomes overwhelming. And I think because of our broken, sinful nature and our natural resistance to authority, we actually miss out on it.
Yeah.
Like I think back to if I would have just chilled out and just trusted whoever it was, I wouldn't have had to worry about all this other nonsense.
Yeah. When you talked about Adam understanding his role and the distinction that existed in his relationship, and he is not God. It reminded me of my first homiletics class or sermon writing in the seminary, and on the very first class meeting, the professor had all of us, he said to open our notebooks, and the very first thing he said, you need to write in your notebook in very large letters, "I am not God." And then they said, the next thing I want you to write is, "I am speaking for God." And so he helped, just with those two statements, clarify, not that any of us were needed convincing that we were God, but you do tend to need this reminder about the place of your role and what you are supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. And I think that was very helpful. And I do actually try to remind myself of that a great deal when it comes to sermon writing or preparing other parts of the office here, that God truly is in charge of this. And I get to be a part of it in a certain way, which is super cool. And it remains cool as long as I'm not trying to shoulder a burden that doesn't belong to me. So this commandment, you're right. You make a good point. It's very freeing, in many ways.
It could be. Of course, the reason why we reject all this stuff, and I think you bring up a great point, and I'm going to remind me that you brought up a great point and that I got to tie this into that. It's not going to sound like it at first.
I bring up great points like every 5 minutes. You're going to have to be more specific.
You do. I am sorry I didn't give you credit for that.
Why you give me your coffee.
So I think you bring up a great point about putting us under God, because I think the reason why we reject authority so much is because of our experience with people who keep screwing it up.
Yeah.
America exists because King George was a little bit, greedy and stupid.
Oh, I know. I've seen Hamilton.
He just wasn't very wise.
No.
He picked on a bunch of Englishmen who were expecting to be treated the same way that their fellow Englishmen were, and they weren't, and that is what really set them off.
Yep. And it eventually that catches up to you.
It does. But even, this is why I think the idea of like putting ourselves and all authority, recognizing it as an extension of God's authority, we're all under God. It works a lot better when you do what your preaching professor said, like, hey, remember, you're not God.
Yeah.
But remember, you are speaking for God, and that's a heavy responsibility.
Sure.
So that makes life better, I think, when your parents are constantly remembering that they are under God, but they're also doing God's work.
Right.
They're not God, but they are under God, and they're doing His work. That is the only way to get the right sort of humility necessary to lead. But I would also say that it's helpful even when, maybe especially when, they're screwing it all up.
Yes. Well, and I think, and this is something, again, more and more I've come to, try to include in the conversation about this commandment, that we live in, you pointed out, our specific society, struggles with this. And part of it is we live, we're supposed to live in the idea of a meritocracy.
Yeah.
So how well you perform, how the kind of person you are, that determines the outcome of your life and your relationships. And so we've taken that and I think rightly so in many ways made people more accountable for who they are. But now that means that we're examining people more closely, and even within our own families. So you and I will look at our parents and really tend to be, I think, more free in how we assess the kind of people they are and the kind of relationship we had. And so more and more people are starting to look at their parents and go, man, my parents are messed up, and because,
we all are.
Yeah, well, and we probably messed them up,
We messed our parents up? I don't know.
Well, maybe it was just me.
That, my friend, that takes skill.
That's a whole other thing. But, and so we have an increasingly complicated relationship with our families, which means that our relationship with this commandment is going to be increasingly complicated. And so that's why a lot of people struggle with this. Honor your father and your mother. Well, man, my father and mother are a train wreck. Not mine.
But notice it says honor your father and your mother. It doesn't say like them necessarily. It doesn't say obey them.
Not here.
No, but it doesn't say that.
No, that's
it says honor your father and your mother. And so I think there's a way, even when your parents are a train wreck, and let's be honest, there's two kinds of train wrecks, right? There's the everybody's messed up and everybody has baggage.
Exactly.
And then there's the like, ooh, yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. Let's call somebody.
Yeah. You're going to be in therapy for a really long time with that one, like that. There are two kinds. And so you have to, it's important to try to distinguish what is just the fact that we live in this meritocracy and we feel very free to assess the performance of just about everyone for everything. We have reviews and ratings. Everybody wants to know your opinion because
Which is such a poetic way of saying judge.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of judge, I think did we talk about this at the circuit meeting on Tuesday? I think it sort of came up. So when Joseph, who imagine this guy, he's Joseph in Genesis, the Old Testament Joseph, his father favors him and screws up the whole family.
Yeah.
And so his brothers hate his guts, and he's kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
He's an arrogant jerk all the time.
That's a pretty consistent theme in Genesis, isn't it?
It is that parents have screwed it up, right? So Joseph gets thrown into a pit and sold into slavery. And then he winds up serving, Potiphar, right? And then his master's wife tries to get him in bed. He refuses. She claims that he did anyway and gets himself thrown in prison. He's sitting in prison forever and ever. And then finally he gets out and he is able to interpret dreams for Pharaoh after he had dreams back in the beginning of the story and basically told everybody, hey, guess what? You're going to bow down and worship me. Not worship, but what I mean. Like
said that to his brothers.
Yeah, he said it to his older brothers.
Yeah.
Right?
That went
possibly
great.
Much older brothers. Again, see, he was a fool. He was a jerk. He was in no way fit to fulfill the thing that God had planned for him. And so God kind of puts him through all this stuff. And then at the very end, his brothers wind up coming to him while he is the number 2 in all of Egypt, gets all of Egypt and more, the surrounding areas, through a severe famine. His brothers find out who he is. So is his father. He sees the family again. It's very emotional. Then his father dies, and his brothers are like, hey, Joseph, Dad said you should forgive us for throwing you into the pit.
Yeah.
Right? And he says, am I in the place of God?
Yeah.
You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good.
Yeah.
And so there is this sense that authority, even when it's bad, God somehow works it out for good. And, honoring is not, again, necessarily obeying. It's just recognizing that God somehow is at work, even when things are a mess.
So, yeah. And I think that's helpful in determining who is included in this commandment, who in my life is included in here that I need to look to, through this lens. And I think, the basic answer is the people that God puts in my life to do his work for me in some way. All the people who provide for me the things that God, in fact, wants for my life. And who look out for me and who help me and teach me and guide me and support me and all those things, And so and you and I were having this conversation just a little while ago about the nature of authority. And that tends to be where I lean on that word. There's two ways you can look at authority. There's the boss, the person who exercises power over you, whether you want them to or not. And then, of course, there's the person who is an authority in some way in your life. An authority is something that's built on a strong foundation of trust. And so the person, whom I trust to know more than me about something, that is an authority in my life. And I think that's the person that God is calling us to really look to in this commandment and to consider the value that they have in our lives.
Yeah. Our colleague yesterday was talking about the difference between power and authority, right?
Yeah.
That there are people that have power, but they don't necessarily have authority. And I think actually God wants those to both be the same.
They should be.
But it is really, really tough in a broken system.
Yeah.
And so this is where it's not so much about obeying God as or obeying authority as it is honoring it. And so I would say that even when you are critical of authority, there's a way to do it, or a way to view it at least, that recognizes it as we need to preserve the honor of this office, so to speak.
Yeah.
The office of pastor, the office of president, the office of senator,
Teacher.
congressperson, governor, teacher, the office of doctor, the office of, right? and because we need to protect that and honor that, we need to root out the the bad ones.
Yep.
But unfortunately, the way our society and our culture is it's very hard to make those distinctions.
Sure.
Everybody's got a team. For whatever reason, there's a bias, and people will defend the authority no matter what.
Or criticize.
Or criticize it no matter what.
Yep.
And then how do you find the ones that really do need to get held accountable somehow, rooted out?
And so, if you go through Luther's catechism, and he talks about this, and how do you honor these people and support them, and he talks about helping them. How do you help the people who fill these roles, these offices in your life? And, one of the things that we can do is to help them be better.
Yeah.
I talked to my congregation about this yesterday in our Bible class. I told you we were working on 1 Corinthians, and somehow this kind of subject came up in, I think it's chapter 3. And, I talked about, holding ministers of the word accountable for what they teach. I say it's something that you owe yourselves, but you also owe to me. It is how you help me by being aware of what I'm doing and paying attention and helping me to grow in it and do better.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great gift. That is how we honor the people who provide something to us in our lives.
Yeah, and certainly you can overdo honoring people, but I mean, in our world, I think we could all pastors could do a little bit more honor than what we've been getting lately.
Well, and I don't know, can you overdo honor?
Well, yeah. They do that in like cultish type systems.
But I think if you're overdoing something, I think it ceases to be honor.
Maybe.
At least in the context of this commandment and the way that God intends honor to be given.
Overdoing honor means it's a system ripe for abuse
and a manipulation.
And I've had a guy on here, David Rodriguez, to talk about spiritual abuse. He's got really good in-depth kind of analysis of how that stuff happens. And there's a phrase that in scripture that these types of abusive leaders pull out regularly: touch not the Lord's anointed, or something like that. And that's not the context of it is not what they typically use it for, but they do that, they pull it out, and they're like, I'm in charge, right? Again, this is why we don't give authority very freely.
Yeah.
There are so many places where where that happens. But I would say that those are not the norm.
I agree with you. I agree. I think many people who wind up in positions of authority do so with the best of intentions. And sometimes those people have the right intentions, but they don't have the right gifts. Or sometimes they do have the right gifts and they have the right intentions, but they get into a system that isn't really set up to facilitate the right gifts and intentions. So there's on any number of circumstances that can mess that up for us.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something earlier about like helping. And I think that's something that requires a certain level of humility. So, on both sides.
Yep.
So, like, you need to be willing to receive that help as a person in some type of authority. But you also have to, in order to give it, you have to be willing to say, you know what? God put them in this place of authority, and maybe I want to help them. And by helping them, they may get a little bit of a boost, right? And people might go, oh, look at how great they are, and I won't. But again, if they're doing things right, if they're decent people, they're trying to follow the Lord, and they receive whatever it is that you're giving, that's actually pretty huge.
It is.
Then you should let them have it for the sake of the honor of whatever it is that we're talking about. Honor your father and mother. You started out with mom and dad, like actually starting where this literally starts, not getting into all this other stuff. And, I think dads are kind of making a comeback.
Yeah.
Men in general.
Yeah. The the commercials you see on TV, fewer and fewer are featuring the
idiot dad.
The idiot dad. Yeah.
Well, not just commercials, but TV shows and
sure, yeah, popular media
everything.
In general, yeah. It is a it was a what's the word, trope that was pretty common for some time, and we could get into the reasons why. We'd be here all day with that, I think, but
I think it gets to our reluctance to have any kind of authority.
Oh, maybe
they're trying to break down that spot,
or also to normalize it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, no, I think you're right. It's the idea. I read maybe a couple of years ago a piece about the difference between the millennial generation and previous generations. Gen X and then boomers and things like that. And poor millennials have caught so much grief over the last few years, because their generation has grown up with an entirely different reality, and they've acclimated to it in different ways, and so that's an easy target. But
the boomers also really screwed things up.
So. Well, they did, and what was interesting is this was talking about some of the things that millennials they're getting better at than previous generations. One of which is their concept of family. They have a tighter knit idea of family and how to create a healthy environment for family, maybe because of some of this accountability we've talked about. They're spending more time with families. They don't value this notion that 50 hours of work a week is should be standard, and that's a good thing for everyone to do. No, it's your time should be at home with your family, and so consequently, they're actually bringing the divorce rate down.
Wow,
in our country,
and I hadn't seen that.
I don't think it's not a tremendous difference yet, but it was a trend that is starting to be noticed, and so So to your point, I think there is a shift.
That's a good thing, and a lot of people go after dads because dads have screwed up royally.
Sure.
In many ways. But also because there is something about dads. Dads statistically matter way more. In almost every category, If dad screws up, it really messes you up.
Yeah.
If mom screws up, yeah, it might mess you up. But dad can really screw you up.
Yeah, that is a level of influence that people like us who are dads don't necessarily want.
Yes, exactly. And that's why, sometimes they're running from that, and that's how they make this mess. But especially when it comes to faith, maybe, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but I remember many times seeing statistics that basically said, if your mom goes to church and takes you to church, you got a decent chance of basically being a churchgoer, Christian, whatever. If mom and dad take you to church, or if dad takes you to church, you got a way higher chance. If mom and dad do it, it bumps it up a little bit, but I mean, really, like, clearly the evidence is like dad is the influence, and that's boys and girls. Anybody that I talk to, there are an awful lot of people I talk to, I guess, that are really angry at God or at church, or have like done a full throttle rejection of Christianity and their faith and all that. Very, very often. It's so common. It's like I'm almost always just waiting for that to happen. There's something going on with dad.
Well, how do we describe God? What do we call him?
Well, I mean, if you still read the Bible, Father.
That's true.
But there are people that reject that.
And granted that I understand that there's other ways, but I mean, it's all over our creeds, I mean, it's just part of the language of the church. Mm-hmm. And so why would we be surprised if somebody has a difficult and complicated, challenging relationship with their father, that they're going to transfer that to this other relationship that you and I are insisting we look at through this lens.
Yeah. It's complicated. I really do like this thing from your professor. I am not God. I am speaking for God.
Yeah.
It almost makes me want to take the approach from, hey, we need to obey, not obey, but honor authority, and flip it to, we need to recognize the authority that's been entrusted to us. So, like vocation, the idea of vocation, that's a big theological topic that came out of the Reformation with Martin Luther. This idea that at the time, the priest was the guy.
Yep.
And the priest and the bishop and the pope, and they were not just the most important within the church. They basically mattered more than everyone. And then the monks, right? Like if you went off and you prayed and you did all these good spiritual works, like they mattered, and everybody else was just garbage.
Yep.
But what I think Luther brings out in the Reformation is that there are so many ways that people serve God. It's not just in this official capacity, right? It is the person that's sweeping the floor. It's the teacher. It's the doctor. It's the lawyer. It's the police officer. It's the politician or prince in those days,
Sure.
right? It's the scientist. It's the plumber. It's the electrician, it's the carpenter, it's the baker, it's the candlestick maker, right? Like everybody is part, some way, shape, or form, is part of this wonderful system that somehow keeps life going in this messed up world. It's broken. It doesn't work as efficiently as possible. But we're living in this day where people are like this quiet quitting. Like, I'm just not going to care too much about my job. You know what you've heard that phrase before?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And certainly in some ways it's responsible. Like, you shouldn't be working 80 hours a week, and you shouldn't be sacrificing all this stuff for your family.
You shouldn't allow people to pour things on you that don't
belong in your, right? But at the same time, I feel like there's also a piece of it that may just be like, You know, they don't care about me, so I'm not going to care about them.
Sure.
But man, like, it is impossible to get anything done.
Well, yeah, and it misses out on the and a lot of people wouldn't, I don't think, look at it in these terms, but it misses out. You know, what you were just describing is that there is a ministerial aspect to every role in life, and not ministry the way we typically tend to talk about it, what we do here in the congregational life. But ministry is about making the gifts that we have a reality for others. And you can do that anywhere and with anyone. And I think more and more the vocations of other people outside of our office are becoming more critical to the ministry of the gospel. You know, what you were just describing made me think about something that happened with my wife, who was a high school teacher last year or the year before. One of her students, somebody she's pretty close to, I guess, was having a conversation with some of the other students, and they were debating something, and she turned around and came up to my wife and said, "Miss Kane, what do Christians believe?" No one has ever asked me that question.
Yeah.
You know, they come to me with certain expectations about things, but just to flat out, help me understand this,
Did they know they stumbled upon a pastor's wife, or was it just?
I don't know if she did or not. I really don't know. Sometimes the kids are aware of it. Sometimes teenagers are entirely unaware of anything surrounding them.
Kudos to your wife for at least being recognized as a Christian.
Yeah. Well, you know what? She takes her vocation seriously. She's found ways of talking about her faith without, dripping her faith all over everything,
Well, and it's not just about, hey, in my vocation, God gives me opportunities to talk about my faith, although we should do that.
Sure.
But it's also just about doing a darn good job.
Yeah.
Like over the summer, we had to get a new car. Our car kind of blew up a little bit earlier than we anticipated. We had to, it's a really nice car, but holy cow, that process. And
yeah.
so we had to get a hitch put on it like our old car so we could have a bike rack and we could travel over the summer, and it was kind of like a time crunch because things were taking forever. Everything was taking forever. It was taking longer and longer and longer. And so I finally wound up on the phone with U-Haul trying to locate the right hitch and get it installed. I don't even remember how many places I called and how long I waited on hold. Not as long as I was describing to you earlier about my most recent experience, but I made all these phone calls and nobody seemed to have a clue, or they would send me somewhere, forward me somewhere, and it was the wrong place, or it didn't make sense. Or I'm trying to explain to them, no, I've already spoken to 3 different people. What you're telling me is not right.
Yeah.
Like, you're looking in your computer and you're saying it's at that place, but I just talked to that place and they don't have it, right? So this whole big thing. Finally, I inadvertently got connected to some woman somewhere that it wasn't even the right department. It wasn't right. But here she is now on the phone, and I explained the situation. She said, "Well, you're talking to the wrong person." I'm like, I have tried to talk to the right people and they sent me to you. What can you do for me? And this woman, technically not her job, understood what was going on, went out of her way to make it work. And then we actually got disconnected somehow. Like, I wound up being on hold, and finally I was like, it's an hour and a half. She just said she was putting me on hold for a couple of minutes, and I was just too terrified to hang up. But she did whatever needed to be done, and I got the hitch. I got it installed. Like, it arrived. She ordered it from some special place, and it was like, oh, well, you don't actually have to have this one. You could have this one too. These are both compatible, and this one's taking forever to get, but this one you can have it in like 3 weeks. And I was like, well, let's do it. And it arrived, and then there was a problem at the store too. the local store. And here again, there's another woman who's like, all these people supposedly ahead of me. I'm like, I ordered this like a month ago. And she took the time. She went through the stuff. She went into the back. And do you know how much better my day went? Both of those times?
Yeah.
Like, you know, it was easier to be pleasant with my family, with the people on the road, with people at church, with people, you know, like it just helps. And these are people who took what you might look at and you say, this is just such an insignificant job. It's a meaningless job. It doesn't have any purpose. But it does.
There's no such thing.
Exactly.
There's no such thing. And you hit on something, what you just said a moment ago. It was 3 or 4 weeks ago. I don't remember what lesson I was preaching on, but the idea was that we are, as Christians, we are accountable for doing things well, for sharing our faith, for living up to the standards of our faith, for the standards that we demand of others. And my point was that entering into this faith means none of us gets to say, that's not my job.
That's not my job. It's not important. It doesn't really matter.
Exactly.
There's, you're making me think of, actually, it's 1 Corinthians. You're probably not there yet. You talked about 1 Corinthians 3. But 1 Corinthians, I believe it's 10:31. And Paul, let's see, I got to get a little closer here. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God.
Yeah.
Give no offense to Jews or to Greeks or to the church of God, just as I try to please everyone in everything I do, not seeking my own advantage, but that of many, that they may be saved.
I'm familiar with that passage, and
it's not the only place, too. I mean, just looking at the notes here, Colossians 3:17, I know for sure that's basically the exact same quote, at least verse 31 part. 1 Peter 4:11, you know, it's a similar topic. It's not exactly the same. It just basically says we all have gifts, and we should all use them for the glory of God. You know, this is just everything, and this comes back to authority. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
All authority ultimately comes from God. And so if you're working for a crummy boss, you're still working for a crummy boss who is working for somebody who's working for somebody who's working for somebody who's working for God.
Yeah. Well, and go on to chapter 13 in this letter, you know, where he gets into the ruling authorities, you know, and how we are, you know, called to be part of good order in all things. And that includes, you know, life underneath people who may not even directly have your best interest in heart, you know, but we can still be part of good order.
Well, and sometimes your best interest is not what's the best interest.
And that, well, yeah.
I mean, just because it's good for you doesn't mean that it's actually good for everybody, right? You ever see the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit movies?
Oh, yes, many times.
So in the Hobbit, there's, what is it, Lake Town?
Yeah.
It's the residents of the city of Dale that have been, you know, torched out of Dale and into this Lake Town thing. And the Master, right? You know, remember the Master? He's like the prince of this rickety old town on a lake, like literally on barges, like on a lake. And then he's got his right-hand man.
Toady.
I can't remember his name. He's just a disgust. I mean, whoever that guy was, like, he did a really good job of making everybody hate him. Yep. And I hope he is nothing like that in life, because, man, that must be a miserable existence. But here's this guy who's the right-hand man to the guy in charge, and he is always looking out for his best interest.
Right.
But it's not the best interest of anyone else.
And it winds up being self-defeating for himself as well.
And in the end, yes, exactly.
Know? And I think that's a good reflection of what a lot of people struggle with. And go back to the passage you referenced in chapter 10 there. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's the passage where Paul's dealing with whether or not Christians should eat meat sacrificed to idols. It's somewhere in that area.
Yeah.
And Paul goes into the idea that it's about the conscience of the other person. If someone new to Christianity is uncomfortable eating meat that's been sacrificed to an idol, well, then fine. They shouldn't be forced to eat it. And you know what? If I'm having dinner with them, I'm not going to eat it.
I'm not going to eat either. Yeah.
And so putting this humility at the center of our service to others, those that we care for and those that care for us, this is something that in our individualistic society that you and I live in today, people just don't put enough emphasis on that, and so we lose sight of our vocation and how significant it is, and the vocations of others.
Yeah, thinking about others is an important part of exercising authority and being under authority.
Yeah.
Put yourself in the shoes of the people in authority. I mean, think about all the voices they've got, right? It's not like you're the only one that wants what they want.
Right.
Right? And how do you manage to keep the whole thing together? There are times, I got 4 kids, my wife and I, we're trying to figure out what's the best thing to do. Sometimes we got to think about the whole family. And sometimes we got to think about one.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do. We don't always want it to be the same one, right? And we don't always want one to be subjugated because of the rest. It's complicated.
Sure, it's very complicated.
And just imagine, that's 6. It's a household of 6, which may terrify some people. But now think about, hey, you're an employer and you have a business where you employ 15 or 20 or 200, or you have a congregation and you have, 50, 100. There are some that have thousands, right? And it's not easy to make those decisions, but you have to make them the best that you can, thinking about the most benefit.
And you and I went through that 2 years ago, just like every other church in America did.
COVID, pandemic.
And, what do you do to best look out for the
Nobody
people?
wants the same thing, and they threaten to
you
kill you no matter which way you.
Regardless of your decision. That was, and this is a decision about how to handle something that no living pastor has ever ushered a church through.
Yeah.
So, you wrestle with it. You talk to people you trust, and you try to make a decision, and then inevitably people will be upset with it, and they will disagree with it, and you still have to serve them.
Yeah. I was actually relatively pleased that when we talked with the elders and the governing board here at the time, I think we talked too, but I was pretty impressed with the level of honor for authority.
Sure.
So in one sense, I was very new. We had not met yet in person when I got here. I was installed digitally.
I remember that. Yeah.
But I was impressed, and maybe that helped, right? Because he's a new guy. We're not going to try and be a jerk to him yet. The elders, the governing board, we basically were like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And we did it, but, then the people, there were plenty of people that were not happy about some things. And I think that whole experience, not so much for me, but just the broader, what happened in America and in churches, really illustrates the fact that we don't actually care about authority at all.
Well said.
That we really just, so here we've come full circle now back to, you should probably obey authority. Because, masks, I was not a fan of masks. I hated those things.
I don't know if I know anybody who was.
Who was? But is it, this was the question. The question was, is asking people to wear a mask something that is worthy of rebelling against authority?
Yeah.
And some people believed yes, and some people believed no. And so it just became this giant mess. And then vaccine things. And so here's something also, like, to be an authority, not just, like, if we just reverse it for a second, we say, if you're in authority, when you come down hard on a topic, you can for sure expect people to rebel.
Yes.
Because that's what people do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, was it Romans 7? Where basically just says, like, hey, the law basically makes me want to stick it to the man.
We are just little rebellion machines.
That's just what we do.
Yeah.
So
back to this letter you quote. That's why Paul wrote this letter. You know, that's what people do and who they are.
yeah. Well, but it should not be that way
No.
among you, right? You should be thinking of the other person. And I think there are multiple ways to take that with the specifics of the pandemic, right? I mean, there are people that actually, masks were really not, I mean, it was a problem.
They were
like, it was a
harmful.
major issue for them for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
You know, I know people that have trouble with their vision, that, you know, when they have something here, like, it just, you know, messes with them pretty bad. But I also know plenty of people that were like, everybody needs to be in a mask because my kid has some serious immune issue.
Yeah.
And then you get the vaccines, right? Like, hey, no, vaccines don't mean like you're never going to get it or you're not going to spread it or something, even though that's the way they sold it. I mean, they totally botched that whole thing in my mind. But then you're dealing with worker shortages and you require people to get vaccinated. Of course they're not going to get it, right? I mean, some people just weren't going to get it, and some people couldn't get it, and it just turned into this major mess.
I mean, when something becomes the accepted norm that you are now told this is what you will do or this is what you will believe, people will just on general principle reject it without a second thought. Can you
Especially
believe
in the good old USA?
we are dealing with an increased number of people who believe the earth is flat. Like, that number went down historically,
Yeah.
and now it's starting to do this. Why? Because there's any evidence of it? No.
Well, I think people don't take their authority seriously. You know, they don't realize the kind of impact they have. For a very long time, the media, you know, this will make me, you know, sound very conservative
Sound
here.
like that guy.
Yeah, but the media has for sure been lying to us. And not lying in a way that they realize they were lying, but because that's what people do. There is always a bias.
Sure.
And when you act like what I'm saying is absolutely, I mean, that's arrogant.
Sure.
This is absolutely the truth, you know? No, you're not that good. But then because of that, it creates this other subculture now where, okay, well, we're going to have to find a way to get real news. But then those people wind up doing the same thing,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just like this Wild West at this point as far as news is concerned.
Or knowledge
and
in
information,
general.
knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
The unlimited access of it, man, that
What we have in our access through these little devices, kingdoms would have been given in exchange for this. Mm-hmm. And what do we do with it?
play games.
Yeah. Play Wordle. Which is fun, but you know.
Yeah, but it matters how we, you know, hey, I am not God.
Yeah.
I am speaking for God. I better take this seriously, not overstate it, not understate it. you know, and obviously it's a little bit different getting into a pulpit from a lot of other things, but we all in some way fall under this line of authority somehow.
We are accountable in everything we do and say, whether we want to admit it or acknowledge it or not.
And there are consequences for our respect for authority. And, you know, sorry, I'm getting dinged like crazy, and I keep looking, thinking maybe we have a comment or something. That's
Nobody's
nonsense.
listening to this.
Some group text that, oh my goodness. Maybe not yet, but they will. They will. They will. It's too early. They're all working,
That's true.
doing their best to honor the authority that
By having
they are
real
under.
jobs.
Yeah. I don't think I ever read the explanation here in the commandment. Honor your father and your mother. What does this mean? We should fear and love God so that we do not despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them.
Yeah.
And do we always obey them? I think they actually bring that question out. Am I always to obey my parents and other authorities without question? No, we must disobey them if they require us to disobey God's word. So, you know, obviously that's an important
Well,
thing.
I mean, think about the man who wrote that explanation. Think about his relationship with his father.
Oh, Luther?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was, he told his father to take a hike when he said, you're going to go to law school. He's
That's
like,
right. Well, he was
"No."
in law school, I think, at one point, but he quickly found his way to the monastery after that. And
Lightning storm.
yeah. And it severely impacted his relationship with his father. So was that being disobedient? Or was that serving his vocation in the way that he felt most called to?
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting you bring that up because actually the guy that we have a connection with long before we ever met, or maybe we met and we just didn't realize we met, Joel,
Yeah.
Pastor Joel, he was my SMP vicar. So he was going through a distance learning program to become a pastor, and y'all were,
We were
in
classmates.
the same,
Yeah.
you were classmates, same cohort and everything. His story was the reason why he wasn't already a pastor was because his pastor, when he was Catholic, he was raised Catholic, and his parents always thought he would become a priest. But then he got married to this Lutheran girl. The whole priest idea kind of went out the door.
Marrying them Lutheran girls just wrecks everything.
But now, not only was he not going to become a priest, but he wasn't going to even be Catholic. He became a Lutheran, and it created this issue with his family, his parents.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, okay, so I'll be a pastor. And I don't know all the details about what was going on there, but he and I did have a couple of good conversations about it. He was going to become a pastor, but a Lutheran pastor now. And he went to his pastor and he's having this conversation about how everything is going on, him and his family, his parents, and all that kind of stuff. And his pastor said, honor your father and your mother. You should wait. And he did. And his experience, I'm not saying, Luther obviously was a very unique person in history.
In every sense.
I'm not trying to second guess that decision. I'm just saying there's another place now where this guy waited, and he waited nearly 40 years,
Yeah.
30, 35 years.
Yeah, he was close to retirement, I think.
Yeah,
when
he
started.
was
Yeah.
in his mid-late 50s. And he said it was the greatest decision ever because it actually started to heal
Yeah.
the stuff that his parents were already kind of dealing with, and the new wife who, I'm sure they were like, oh, they just took him away from the real church,
Sure.
and it just goes to show you that, again, back to the news idea, to come down and act like there's a one-size-fits-all answer for everything. There's only one way. There's only one approach. There's only one way to interpret events and facts and all that kind of stuff. It's just simply not true.
Of course.
Here we are handling the word of truth, the word of God, recognizing we're not God, but we're trying to speak for God, that, hey, there's some gray here. You got to be in conversation with God, get some counsel from folks that might know better than you, that have a read on the situation.
And I think if you wanted to summarize the intention behind this commandment, I think it is to acknowledge that there are those who know more than you, and to acknowledge your responsibility to those who don't yet know what you know.
That's a good way of thinking about it.
You know?
Yeah.
And to take that seriously.
Big time serious. It's a little bit overwhelming at times, and we do have to think for ourselves, be in conversation with the one who is over all, the one who all authority comes from. Got to give a little authority, got to take a little authority.
Yeah.
And this is how Paul, he wants it. You can make people do things, but that doesn't actually get them to do things.
True.
And that's the power versus authority idea we talked a little bit about. But Paul, repeatedly, who should have all the authority in the world, he doesn't say, give me all your money in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. He doesn't say, you better set this guy free in Philemon. He doesn't do that. He continually appeals, which in a sense almost gives him more credibility and makes you want to bestow more authority on him.
That's another good word.
But here's a guy who could absolutely make people. I mean, he had to have had enough of a following that people were like, oh, this is Paul the Apostle. Like,
right.
I mean, he's the reason this whole church exists. And, he met Jesus on the road, and look at how the big U-turn he did.
So
absolutely,
let's let him take care of this for us.
Yeah, but instead he says, hey, we're taking up this collection for the famine, starved people in Jerusalem. But I want you to do this of your own free will. God loves a cheerful giver, right? Philemon, he says, hey, I've done enough for you that I could make you do this.
Yeah.
But I'd rather you just did it because you love the Lord.
Yeah.
And because you love your brother.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's come to me and he's become a Christian now, and he's coming back to you as more than a slave. He's coming to you as a brother. And you need to treat him as a brother who has been freed by the Lord Jesus Christ.
No one has ever, throughout history, been successfully browbeat into serving the Lord. At least not serving the Lord with a servant's spirit.
Yeah. Just another instance of how the church of all places and Christians of all people, it matters how you get there.
Sure.
It's not about the destination.
It absolutely does.
It's more process oriented. It's more about the way that you go about things than anything that you ever achieve. And that's hard for us to grasp in a meritocracy, in a goal-oriented society where we are inundated with the need to achieve goals. But Paul shows us, hey, earn the credibility, imitate me right after this.
Right.
In we looked at 1 Corinthians 10:31, and the end of the chapter. Chapter 11, verse 1 belongs probably with chapter 10. But he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ.
Yeah. That confidence without arrogance.
Are we exercising authority in ways that we can say, imitate me as I imitate Christ? That messes me up every time.
Ephesians chapter 5. I mean, be the father and mother that people want to honor and serve.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, any final thoughts, or you ready for another cup of pumpkin pecan pie coffee.
That stuff was really good, but I think 1 cup is my limit.
Okay, we'll move on to ice cream then.
Knock yourself out, dude.
It's lunchtime almost.
Yeah.
Close.
You got a problem, man.
Actually, I haven't had a whole lot of ice cream. I had ice cream yesterday for the first time in weeks.
Actually, I've gotten on an ice cream kick at home for dessert. I discovered the Ben & Jerry's peanut butter half baked. And man, let me tell you,
Peanut butter half baked.
it's if you haven't tried it, it's worth it.
There's nothing special sprinkled
No,
in there.
no,
at
no,
all,
not
right?
that kind of baked.
Okay. Well, it's always good to chat with you,
It's always good to be here.
and hope this has been helpful. If we made any sense at all,
Yeah, I'm not even sure what commandment we talked about today.
maybe there was something in that coffee.
It could have been, yeah.
All right, y'all. Hey, invite you to join us in this struggle to honor your father and your mother, to honor those in authority, and to be worthy of honor for all of us who are in some kind of authority, some role where we have influence over other people, and try to do it all, whatever it is that we're being called to do, as if we are serving the Lord, because indeed we are. So
We are.
ice cream is sweet. Jesus is sweeter. Authority can be sweet. Honor can be sweet. Jesus is far sweeter, far more worthy of honor, and far more worthy of our efforts at attempting to be worthy of honor. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Catch y'all.